open our hearts. Yom Kippur demands that we show our vulnerability because sometimes we need to be broken in order to become whole. It is for that reason that I'm going to be vulnerable with you all today. Addiction is everywhere and extremely more prevalent than any of us care to admit. If we don't personally struggle with addiction, the likelihood of a family member or a loved one struggling is off the charts. The Jewish community is just beginning to open its eyes to the epidemic that is addiction. This is generally something that we just don't talk about. Addiction has been for too long coded in shame, to the point that many families feel unable to even pray for the healing of a loved one struggling with an addiction publicly. What is interesting to me, however, is that I have found so many beautiful connections between work and recovery and the Jewish tradition. I see so many ways that the spiritual work of recovery can enhance the spiritual work of Judaism, and vice versa. This is the reason so many Jewish spiritual seekers, such as one of my teachers, may his memory be a blessing, Reb Zalman Schachter Shlomi, found incredible Jewish wisdom in 12-step programs, even though he himself did not struggle with a diagnosed addiction. As a friend of Bill, I know what it's like to be born with a disease of addiction. But the truth is, every one of us is addicted to something. It could be alcohol, drugs, shopping, losing weight, smartphones, our jobs, gossip. Addiction is really a means of escaping reality, something that we all find ourselves yearning to do from time to time. We have been talking this High Holy Day season about the themes of courage and connection. Let us take a second to think for ourselves. What are the addictions that we wish to be free from this year? What amount of courage would it take to confront our addictions head on? What kind of connection would we need in order to heal ourselves? For those that struggle with a diagnosed addiction, our disease can feel like the awful decree that many of our prayers warn us of. The central prayer of the High Holy Days, Unatan Tokef, offers three main ways that we can avert a severe decree. The silver lining of our fate, if you will. Teshuvah, or returning, tefillah, or prayer, and tzedakah, or righteous acts. I found it incredibly interesting to see how many of the 12 steps of recovery and these three central concepts are very intertwined. The first couple of steps help us prepare ourselves for release of addiction. Step 1, admitting we were powerless over our addiction and our lives had become unmanageable. The very first step is having the courage to say that we are enslaved to our addictions. As Jews, slavery is something that we are familiar with through our story of the Exodus. Even the Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, means the narrow places. And anyone that has ever struggled with addiction knows just what true narrowness of spirit feels like. If we are able to tap into our cultural memory of slavery from the Exodus, we can realize that we are powerless over our addiction. Now, I know what you're thinking. I have total control over my addiction to my smartphone. I can just put it down or turn it off and be totally fine. Well, this step tells us that it's not as easy as it seems to admit that we are powerless over our addictions. An invitation to try one full day this year, maybe even Shabbat, when you turn off your smartphone. I have adopted this practice, and it has been a total game changer for me in my mental and spiritual health. Step 3, make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to a higher power. Step 3 teaches us that the decision itself to free ourselves of addiction is the freedom. This is a choice we must make again and again. Similar to the story of the Exodus, slavery didn't necessarily end at the crossing of the sea. Freedom is a state of mind, and it took years, maybe even generations of wandering for us to settle into the idea of being free people. So what could life look like for us if we choose to free ourselves of our own addictions? Are we ready? Teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah can avert our severe decree. First, teshuvah, or returning. Step 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This step captures the essence of cheshbon hanefesh, or accounting of the soul, which we do during the month leading up to the High Holy Days. I always think that the word fearless is the most important word in this step. Do we have the courage that it takes to make a fearless moral inventory of ourselves? What kinds of things would we discover? Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. This step requires coming panim el panim, face to face, with the pain that we have caused for another person. And not only do we admit this pain to God and to ourselves, but also to at least one other person, which highlights the importance of accountability in community. This is the reason why in the traditional confessional prayer, which we will pray in a few minutes together, it reads Asham nu, Bagad nu, the suffix of nu bringing in the collective, we have sinned. This is also why we are not here alone today, on our holiest day of forgiving ourselves. We look into each other's eyes, and we see into each other's souls, even the shadowy parts. Community accountability is very much a part of the Jewish experience of Teshuvah. Another huge part of releasing our addictions is realizing who we are doing it for. Of course, we're always doing it for ourselves, first and foremost. But what gives us power over our addiction is for the sake of our loved ones. Today is my wedding anniversary, and my partner, Noam, is hands down the reason why I chose to become free of my addiction. Who in your life could benefit from your release of addiction? Step 8, made a list of persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. For those of us that adopt the practice of asking for forgiveness for those who we have wronged during this time of year, this sounds very familiar. Willingness to make amends is a crucial element of Teshuvah. But we know that making amends is not begging for forgiveness. The word amends applies mutuality. We reflect forgiveness when we ask to be forgiven. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. Have you ever had the feeling that you can totally get all of your sins out of the way before Yom Kippur, because it will be released in a few days anyway? Maybe even take a trip to Vegas, or eat a couple tubs of Ben & Jerry's because the fast is coming. Anybody ever feel like that? Well, step 10, and the Jewish tradition, by the way, reminds us that this isn't exactly how Teshuvah works. In fact, there are many times throughout the year, and even throughout each day in our tradition, that we are supposed to do Teshuvah. Jewish time moves in a forward-moving spiral, asking of us to try to leave each Yom Kippur better than who we were before we entered it. Teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah can avert our severe decree. Tefillah, or prayer. Step 11 teaches us, sought through prayer and meditation, to improve our conscious contact with God. This is exactly what we're doing today, deepening our connection to the divine through prayer and meditation. Step 11, however, asks of us to continue this practice of prayer through our daily lives. Similar to the book of Proverbs, when it reads, "Know God in all your ways." What helps us be free from our addictions is deepening our connection with a spiritual awareness. Teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah can avert our severe decree. Lastly, tzedakah, or righteous acts. Step 12 teaches, having had a spiritual awakening, we try to carry this message to others who struggle. I know that in the darkest times of my life, volunteering can bring me profound light and hope. When we engage in tzedakah, we take the focus out of ourselves and onto the other. We also practice this step by bringing this issue of addiction from behind the curtain of shame. By doing so, we let people struggling know that they are included in our tent as well. We speak up about our own stories, and in turn, we help others get through their own narrowness of spirit. It is my hope that this is only the beginning of this conversation for us as a community. I bless all of us with the courage to confront our own addictions and connection to those that are struggling that we might not have noticed before. Adonai, this Yom Kippur, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.